Yeah, it's working for me now. If you can hear me, Leslie.
Anne
Emery, is
Marie,
that
is that you?
Yes, it's working now. For some reason, I was getting an invalid meeting ID earlier.
if you were trying to go in by phone, I mean, sometimes I've misentered the code so dang long that you got to type in.
Yeah. So I'm coming in from the computer, but I did copy it from one to another, and I think that may have been my issue.
Yeah, that could be. That could be. No, I'm glad it's working. And I heard it say it's being recorded, so all is well.
Excellent. Thank you for your help.
No problem. No problem. And probably either later on tonight or first thing in the morning, I'll grab that recording and put it in the box folder for you and send you the link to it.
Okay, great. Appreciate that.
No problem. Have a great meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Hi, Lizanne. It's Emery.
Hi, Emery. How are you?
Okay. Did you want to test sharing, or did you want me to try to share?
No, I can test sharing.
Okay.
Um, huh.
At the bottom of at least the way mine looks, at the bottom center of the window, there's a green
Yeah, I'm looking at
briefcase
it.
looking thing.
I'm looking at it. Oh, here it is. I see it. There we go.
Looks great.
Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
All right. Yeah, my desktop, it showed my desktop in a unusual format, so took me a minute to find what I wanted to share.
Okay. Great. So I think we're all set. Is 50 minutes good?
Oh yeah, we might not take all of that, but at least it gives, plenty of time if people want to discuss. So yeah.
Okay, great.
I think we could have used 50 minutes at the Xsede. I think they would have liked to have more time to discuss. So I think it's good to have that time.
Yeah, yeah.
And nobody's going to complain if they get out a few minutes early.
No, but that usually doesn't happen with these meetings.
I know. Yeah.
Depending on how many members we get here, well, we can all be a bit long-winded.
Hello.
Hi, Sergio.
Hey, Emre. How are you?
Okay, I'm here.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Really zen.
I'm here.
Thank you for the report, Lizanne.
Yeah. Didn't Julie do a great job on that report?
Oh, it's amazing. I like the front page too.
Yeah. Yeah. She did a great job.
Yeah. So we're, circulating it among various committees.
It's actually very interesting I read it. I read the whole thing and it was actually very interesting to read.
It is. Yeah.
Which you can't say about all evaluation reports.
Indeed. Well, certainly we can say it about yours.
No, not necessarily.
As you will shortly find out.
Yeah, she did a great job.
Yeah. Thank you.
I forgot I have a telephone. So I'm gonna.
So we'll wait a couple minutes for more people to show if we don't get anybody else by. I say we'll start 5 minutes after, unless we get everybody. Somebody's call dialed in. Who's that?
That's Tom. Only gonna be here for a half hour, but
Okay, Tom. Thanks for joining. And John's joined us.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, this is Diego Doncis.
Yeah, hi, Diego. Thanks for joining. I see your name in the list. There's another dial-in caller.
That's me.
Mark
I'm
Miller.
using the phone.
Who's that?
Mark Miller?
I'm connected through the computer for the video, I guess, and but I'm using the phone for audio.
Ah, okay. Okay. Yeah, Mark. Hi, Mark. I see
Hey,
your name
Emery.
listed. And Diego's here. Craig, thanks for joining.
Oh, there I am. Hello, this is Craig.
Yeah, hi. And Deidre's joined us. Thank you. I think we're pretty good. We have a lot to cover, I guess. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome all to our November UAC meeting. And thanks to all the committee members that joined. We appreciate your feedback and perspectives on the material presented. So, John, are you ready to get started?
I am.
Okay.
I'm
So,
going to see if I can effectively, I always have a little trouble with this, but we're going to see what happens. I'm going to try and share a few slides just to see if I can break things. Yeah, you're not seeing that, are you? Where'd my cursor go? Okay, are you seeing the title slide?
looks perfect from here.
Okay, so I didn't have too many slides, but the reason I went ahead and put some together is there's a couple of links on here that may be of interest to folks. So first of all, thanks everybody for joining. These sort of discussions are really important for the project. We really appreciate the input that you provide and the time that you spend working with us. And I was just going to take a few minutes to provide an update on a number of things. But before I actually say anything yet, I just wanted to check with Emery. I believe, Emery, I was actually going back looking through my calendar for the last time we met. And I think the last time we met was in April. Is that correct? Or did I miss there was a meeting somewhere between there?
No, that was it. It's been a while.
Okay, so it's been about 6 months since we got together. So I picked some highlights of things that have happened since then. And for those of us involved in the project on a day-to-day basis, some of this feels like it was a long time ago. But that's just the time dilation effect of being buried in it. Okay, so for some reason my slides are not advancing. That's awesome. There we go. So first I wanted to update on NSF interactions. For those watching the bouncing ball in the background, because I know you don't see this too much from a end user perspective, but we submit an annual report and program plan to NSF. We submitted this in May, and following our review in June, this was approved. So there is a link here to that annual report and program plan if you'd like to take a look at it. It provides, as you might expect, an overview of the prior year and a forward-looking plan for the coming year. So there's a fair bit of interesting stuff in there, particularly from a researcher point of view about some of the things that we plan on doing and such. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're so inclined. Following the submission, we had our annual review, which was June 12th to 14th at NSF. It was actually quite a very good review. We have a very strong report. I was actually going to pull a quote out of the beginning, the executive summary of the report from the panel, but to paraphrase it, it essentially says, well, what we have typically seen in our review reports is that at the end of the review, I ask them to debrief me. And so as the panelists are finishing up their report writing, what they do is they call me back in and basically just review the executive summary so we have a sense of where they're at, because often we don't see these review reports for a little bit after the review. And I like to have a sense of what's in it and also what we may need to be preparing to respond to some of the recommendations that they might make. As in those debriefing sessions that I'm in, they typically take the form, Xsede is really doing a good job, and here are some things that we think you might consider to improve what you're doing. Unfortunately, what typically has happened in the report that we received is it starts with, here are some things that we think you can do to improve. And that first part, which is, hey, you're doing really good, but is often lost. They really came along and fixed that this time around, and have a very strong positive comment about overall performance of the project, impact it's been having on the community and such. So it was very nice to have that in the record, starting with that contextualization of the rest of their comments, because previously it sort of made the project look a little bit like it wasn't performing so well. So we're very happy to have that report in hand. In fact, it was a huge benefit to us. So as you may or may not know, our funding is released on periodic basis, not always annual, as we go through reviews. And in the past year, when we had our review in June of 17, they only authorized us for an additional 6 months of spending. And we went back to NSF and had another review in January, followed by our next annual review in June. And that's a pretty brutal review schedule for a project of this scale and scope. Fortunately, NSF saw the benefit of the strong review that we had, and based on that review, provided a full year of funding. So we do not have that extra review this time around. So quite happy that NSF is, in a very rare occasion, reduced oversight by a little bit when they're in an era of increasing oversight. It's a tribute to the project too that we're able to not only perform but report in an effective way on our progress against goals and such. So this is the short version of this is we've gone through our annual process of being reviewed by NSF. We've come out very good, and in fact, we had the bonus of avoiding an extra review in this coming January. Again, that the annual report and program plan is available out there, and you can follow that link if you so choose to take a look at that. Any questions on that at this point? I know this is mostly just sort of keeping you up to date, but I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions that might come up from anybody.
Just very quickly, I try to cut and paste the link to the annual report, and I can't on this Zoom window that I've got or whatever. Are your slides going to be available at the end of the?
Yeah, sure. We can. We'll put them up on the agenda page for. I'll put them up on the agenda page for this. I didn't have time to post them up there because I had the meeting before this today, but I'll put them up there when we're done here.
Nope, that's great.
I'll go ahead and type that link in right now.
Oh, thanks.
Except that it would change the slide on it.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
So, do you understand what instigated that midterm review? I mean, is that your first midterm review throughout the life of the project?
It is. It's the first time that we've had a midterm review in the 17 years of involvement in this at this level. So this is going back to the beginning of TerraGrid even. So we had never had a midterm review. It was just annual reviews. This is not really a reflection of performance by this project that we had it, but it's a reflection of increased oversight in Washington. And I keep getting warned by our program officer, Bob Chaddock, that this is only going to continue, and I see it happening in other projects too. It's unfortunate, but because of partly because of politics, partly for other reasons in Washington, particularly with respect to NSF and concerns over its ability to oversee large projects, which Xsede fits in the category of. They have been asking for greater oversight of those projects, and so as a result, we were saddled with an extra review this past year. But again, I think it's a tribute to the team that we've done a great job of not only performing, but being able to report on that in a way that's digestible by folks that aren't necessarily doing science or technology. And it's something of a challenge, to say the least.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time. There was a couple of other interesting things that I wanted to remark on, and then I have one other slide that gets into a little bit more interesting topic. But you may or may not know, but at the end of May, NSF held a workshop, 2-day workshop entitled Rethinking NSF's Computational Ecosystem for 21st Century Science and Engineering. And so this was chaired by Dan Reed, who at the time was at Iowa and has recently moved to being provost at University of Utah. And here I provide another link. This is a link to that report, which looks at what is the current situation and really how should things evolve going forward. And we hope that this will inform NSF's thinking, particularly as we look forward to what happens beyond the current Xsede award, and how might that shape the thinking of NSF. That report reflects a lot of things that have been being stated in the community, but hadn't really been documented in a good way. So in some sense, this report is not a lot new, but it was a somewhat more rigorous process by which we came to these conclusions. It was a fairly interesting and diverse group of folks that were not just NSF, but they spanned other agencies, that was really looking at a higher level of where is NSF going with its investments in cyber infrastructure. And so the report was released a few weeks ago, I think it was, and it's worth a read if you want to have a sense of where at least the members of the community that were there are looking at where the investment stands. It will almost certainly have some influence on the investments that NSF makes, or particularly OAC makes, going forward. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure folks were aware of is this PERC 18 conference that we held in July. That went very well. We held it in Pittsburgh and had 650 some odd folks there. As you may or may not know, this was actually previously, or at least in 2016, the last of the Xsede annual meetings that we were holding. And in 2017, a decision in late 2016, we made a decision to spin off the Xsede annual meetings to be a community meeting. And I've presented on this at the UIC before, but I realized that there's been turnover in the membership. So I'm not sure if folks know where this came from or what was happening, but we wanted to create a meeting that was much more open to the much larger community. And so we spun this off and held the first one in 2017 and the second this year in 2018. We were a bit concerned that might have been a difficult transition, but it turns out that it seems to be going quite well. The evaluations that we have from the external evaluators of the conference are very strong and positive. So we feel like that's moving in a good direction. If this isn't a meeting you're aware of, you might want to be. You can look at perc.org, so PEARC.org, and you'll see links to the conference series and to the prior Xsede conferences that predated them. So this is mostly an awareness one for you to make sure you knew that this was out there, and it may be a conference of interest for you to attend in the future also. And then the last thing I wanted to really maybe spend a couple of minutes talking about, we held a strategic planning session in early October, really with two particular goals to it. One is to review our strategic goals in light of something called a stakeholder alignment survey that was conducted. And then also to help this inform planning of something called draft transition plan that we owe NSF by the end of the current project year, which means by August of next year. So first of all, the stakeholder alignment survey is, as its name implies, assesses the alignment of the stakeholders that we serve with the strategic goals that we have stated. And so there are a number of questions that are in here, but many of them take the form of, how important do you think this particular strategic goal is? And another question they ask is, how difficult do you think it is to attain that goal? So a couple of things came out of that. One is that we found very strong alignment amongst our stakeholders that the strategic goals that we have identified are really the right goals, but they also recognize that many of them are very difficult to attain. There was always spreads in all of this, so what we're looking at going back to try and find out is, in some cases, the majority of folks would say, very, very good goal, very hard to attain. But there would be a small set of folks that would say, not that hard. And so I'm particularly interested in whether we can go back to some of these folks and find out, okay, if they don't think it's very hard, how would you go about this? Because we're finding it challenging. So we're hoping to get some additional input through that mechanism. As you may know, that's not always easy because survey respondents are anonymized, and if they don't indicate that that we can follow up with them, we're not allowed to do so. And I don't know myself who responded how, because the evaluators are not allowed to reveal that to me. So this was really helpful in making sure that as we get into the last 3 years of the project, that we still have the right goals and that our stakeholders agree with those goals. And by stakeholders, I mean not just the researchers such as yourself that are making use of the services that we either provide ourselves or provide access to, but we also queried folks from federal agencies, senior administrative staff at various universities, VCRs, vice presidents of research, CIOs, those sorts of folks, and others in the community that fit different stakeholder groups. So it was very good to get that feedback through a structured mechanism where we could substantiate, yes, the community agrees that these are the right goals, despite the fact that they recognize that some of them are difficult. And the other piece that was part of this meeting that we had is we owe NSF this draft transition plan by the end of August next year. And what that is intended to do is to identify the critical services that should be transitioned to any subsequent awardee charged with stewarding the services that Xsede currently operates. So I know that's a little bit convoluted language, but it's on purpose. What's really going on here is that NSF is, as best I can tell, and this is John speaking, not NSF speaking, will issue a solicitation to make an award to steward these services beyond the end of our current award for Xsede 2.0. And in order to both be prepared for transition to potential other awardees and to inform NSF about those things that are most important to include, we've been asked to prepare this draft transition plan. There will be a final transition plan that would be developed in the final year of the current project and then executed to transition services to any new potential awardees. But what I wanted to get to is it's really important to get input from this group. It's possible that some of you were actually surveyed for this stakeholder alignment survey. You don't have to tell me if you were, but I wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to note some of, if there was just one thing that Xsede continued to do, what should it be, right? Which sort of makes you think about, okay, what is really important about what Xsede is providing? And that is actually the form of one of the questions that was in that stakeholder alignment survey. So I'm gonna pause for a second here, see if there's any questions or comments, and then of course, if you have any any thoughts about what are these really critical things that as members of the UAC you see for what we're providing today. I'd surely want to hear that from you. So let me pause for a moment here.
Any committee member comments at this point or questions?
I actually feel like I don't take advantage enough of the services you guys provide, and I wonder how pervasive that is. So, I'd probably be disappointed to find out what I could be doing, and I'm not currently taking advantage of.
Do you not take advantage of them because you don't know about them, or some other reason?
I suspect if I'm like a lot of other PIs out there, that I'm too removed now from the actual day-to-day use of Xsede. So what I really probably should be doing is getting my team together that sit there every day on the nodes and make sure they're aware of stuff and talk to them about what works well and what doesn't.
That certainly would be extremely useful if that could be passed to us, because then we can use that to drive improvements in what we do deliver. Other thoughts? Okay, then similar to this, I'll go to my last slide. Is, of course, doing all this induces us to think about, okay, what does happen after the current award expires? And as I said, as part of, or I had it on my slide, but I didn't talk about it. Part of what we did to help identify those things that are really important to transition to subsequent awardees, we did some scenario planning, and one of those scenarios was, if NSF were to issue a solicitation at approximately half our current budget, and that's just pulling a number from no particular source, but as a planning point, what would you retain going forward? Because that's another way of forcing you to prioritize those things that are provided. And that was a pretty interesting exercise that we went through. And again, this will inform the transition plan and also NSF. But it is also the case that over the next 6 to 12 months or so, NSF will be developing a solicitation, or we hope that they will be, for what will follow Xsede 2.0. And what's most important is decisions about the content will probably be made in the next 4 to 6 months. And then they will actually develop the text of that, which that's a year or more long process for NSF to go through. It's quite complex, actually. And so in order for them to go through the full process of issuing a solicitation, reviewing proposals and making awards, they actually have to get moving now. It seems a long way away at three years out, but I actually feel like it's getting late in the game for them to be making these decisions. So what I wanted to do is say, input from you all that you might have to the project about what is important to retain, what is important to maybe add that we're not doing, but also to provide that input to NSF. They welcome this kind of input, and Bob Chaddock, whose email address you'll see at the bottom of the slide, our program officer, very much welcomes this kind of input. So I would encourage you all to directly contact Bob, but if there's input that you'd like to provide to us, that would help us prioritize things, but also help position us well towards transition, we're very open to those to that input and actually need it. So I'm going to stop there and leave it for the rest of the group to maybe comment on things or ask questions. Quiet group today, huh?
So do you have sort of a list of the core services that you currently offer?
So we do, and in fact, what's coming out of that strategic planning process is a list of those things that we consider to be not only core but critical going forward. So some of the things that came out of that are things like the allocations process. You simply have to have it. ECSS is a highly valued service that we provide, so that the direct work with the research teams to help enable them on the various resources is very highly valued and has strong impact. And then there's some back-end things that I don't expect you all to necessarily recognize, but we see from an operations point of view. Things like the single sign-on hub and authentication services, the accounting and allocations processes that collect usage data and those sorts of things. If you're going to have this sort of environment, there's just some things you got to have. And it helped us to narrow down on that list. And you should recognize that currently, probably largely unknown to you all, we operate about 50 what we call Xsede enterprise services that support a whole variety of things like authentication and authorization, but also things like the website and some of the network infrastructure, a lot of things of that nature. And we're trying to make sure we identify those things that are the most important, so that we inform NSF of that, to inform them in their thinking, but also to make sure we include them into the transition plan. So I think your next question, Emery, would be, and can you point me to that list? I can. There is a list of all the enterprise services out there, but those are going to be highly operational things. The sort of global list of services that we provide is a little harder to get to, other than looking at our website, but that's not necessarily a concise list of those things. So I don't have a handy list that's really crisp bulletized sets of services sort of across the project that we provide, because there are so many things that we do. And that's a challenge that we face.
So this is Richard at MIT. I had to unfortunately connect in a little bit late. Along a similar lines, will we be able to get these slides afterwards, just so I can see what I missed?
Yeah, I'll post these to the agenda page for this meeting once I'm done talking here.
Okay, thanks.
It'll come up during the course of the meeting.
John, could you flip back to slide 4 for a second? Thanks. I just wanted to refresh my memory. One thing I was thinking, when you did this scenario of like cutting the budget by half and what the consequences of that might be and what you would preserve, I was thinking if we were to contact our Bob Chaddock, for example, NSF, and we had a list of things that we might lose if your budget was cut in half, it might provide fodder for the kind of comments I would provide to him, like, you know, we can't afford to lose this or that if we knew what was at stake, you know, what might be lost. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. We haven't prepared a list like that, but I suspect that we will be doing that in the fairly near future as we continue our thinking about this, and particularly in light of preparing the draft transition plan. You know, the complement of what is included, right? What is not included is really important too. That's something I'd be happy to share with this group. I'm reluctant to share it too broadly, because that sort of target goal or budget is nothing that NSF has said. It was really just as a planning exercise. Right. Although I am very concerned over what the budget might be in any subsequent solicitation for these kinds of services, given the pressures that NSF is under with respect to what's demanded of them, and essentially being at a fixed budget, which of course means it's shrinking over time with inflation. So I'd be happy to come back on our next call and review something like that with this group. Okay. It also reminds me that while I've suggested that you contact the Xsede program officer, I also really strongly suggest that you contact your own program officer, as you were talking about. Many of them are not aware that even their funded PIs are making use of Xsede to conduct the work. Right. It's amazing how little they know about that, despite attempts to inform them.
Well, I think nothing informs better than your own constituency. You know, I think we have a lot of power with our own POs. You know.
Right, and that's why I really do encourage you to contact them to first make them aware that you're making use of Xsede in the first place if they're not aware,
Yep.
but also to express what you feel is very important about continuing, because they can then have those internal conversations. And when those come from the folks in what we'd often term as the science directorates as opposed to OAC, that has strong influence on them. They definitely respond to what they hear from their fellow program officers from the other divisions.
Yeah, sounds good. Also, I just wanted to add congratulations on your good review. I know how hard those things can be, so not at the I've never done one at your magnitude, but anyway, congratulations.
Thank you. They require considerable preparation, and we were quite happy with the outcome.
Oh God, yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Hi, this is Diego.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I was skimming through the report. I need to read it more carefully, but I have a question. Probably it's a comment too. The remarks that you made, a common thread is, what are their priorities and what we value. In my particular case, we always are looking for, faster machines, bigger machines, more powerful, and so on. And I would like to hear your comments or your view on where Xsede stands on bigger and faster, especially as we compare Xsede with other Xsede typically is supported by NSF, so one would expect the machines supported by Xsede to be supporting more fundamental science than other funding agencies like DOE or DOD. And when I see the ecosystems, probably DOE have the largest machine, and Xsede doesn't seem to be the same scale in terms of size and speed and bigger and better. So do you have any comments on where do you see Xsede going in that respect?
So I'll have to be careful, and before I start, Emery, you better check me on this, because you just touched on a whole bunch of topics that I have many thoughts about. But let me try and be concise, and I want to first start with a clarifying point, and that is that it turns out that Xsede is expected to provide support to any federally funded researcher, independent of the agency that funds them. As a result of that, it turns out that if you just look at the computational resources getting delivered, which of course is a huge bulk of what we do, it's only about a little less than 50% of those resources go to NSF funded work. The other 50% are going to research funded by other agencies, most notably NIH, DOD, DOE, and then sort of another group of them that are sort of at the NASA. USGS of all places has emerged as a set of researchers who are making use of these things. So we are supporting a much broader set of research projects funded by other agencies. That presents a real challenge, as you might imagine, with respect to available resources, because now we're trying to feed many more mouths, and we get little discretion about being able to say, well, look, the NSF stuff has to come first, or something like that. So the lack of resources is a real problem. As has probably been presented here over time a couple of times, but for those that may not have heard this before, when we go through the quarterly allocations process, we typically see anywhere between 3 and 5 times the number of available resources in the requests. And when the panel reviews and makes its recommendations, those typically are still 2 to 3 times what's available. And then there's a process that we go through to reduce, it's a formulaic process to reduce those recommendations to fit within the envelope of available resources. So when you've gone through that process, you will see folks who get awards for well-reviewed requests that still are cut anywhere from a third to 2/3 of what they requested to what actually gets allocated. That makes it really hard to make progress with your research team because you simply don't have the resources necessary to get it done. The strategy that we're taking right now under the guidance of NSF is not to make binary decisions about these requests, meaning either you're funded or you're not, or you're supported or not, but to try and spread resources as best as possible among as many groups as possible to at least support some level of work. Now you can imagine that there is a point at which that breaks down where you're trying to spread it too thin. And I feel that we're rapidly approaching that on a couple of fronts. So we on a quarterly basis are presenting to NSF the outcomes of the allocations and particularly underscoring the lack of resources based on not only what has been requested, but what has been recommended through peer review, which I think they take more seriously because there is some sense and probably some truth to the fact that there are those out there that kind of game the system, inflating their requests knowing they're going to get cut. But when you look at what is recommended by the panel, they've sort of eliminated that fat as best they can. And so that represents a more realistic demand than necessarily what is requested because of the situation. NSF has not told us of any clear plan for new resources to be available over the next few years. As you may know, Stampede 2 has recently stood up, so that's sort of their big machine investment. But as I've pointed out to them before, and I'll be visiting NSF later this month to talk about these issues specifically. But if you look at the lifetimes of the current existing resources and the lifetime of Xsede, which runs until August of 2021, by that point in time, Stampede 2 would be the only allocable resource in the portfolio. You have to very much question whether it makes sense to operate an infrastructure like Xsede to support one allocatable resource.
Precisely.
Yeah, so it was conceived in the context of, early in Xsede we had 22 to 25 resources at 8 or 9 sites, and it made a lot of sense to do what we're doing. But if there's 2 or 3 or 4 resources at 2 or 3 sites, you have to wonder whether that still makes sense or not. And within Xsede, we've done some analysis of that in trying to assess return on investment and cost avoidance by doing what we're doing in Xsede versus simply having a set of independent centers that operate more or less autonomously from one another. And as the number of sites and resources goes up, the return on investment and cost avoidance numbers get much better. But as those numbers go down, then there isn't as strong an argument. And I think NSF needs to be aware about this, depending on what they plan to do going forward. Now, it has been hinted at by NSF that they will have another round of what we call Track 2 level awards, a solicitation next calendar year. That I would predict, although this is John's prediction and by no means any reflection of NSF's ideas on this, but if you go back, not the last round, which is Stampede 2, but the round before that, we saw the likes of Jetstream and Bridges and Comment. And so I suspect that if they do have a solicitation next year, it will be for 2 or 3 slightly smaller systems with the intent of trying to bring new types of technologies into the ecosystem. But even so, that would make a total of maybe 4 or perhaps 5 resources. And again, the argument becomes weaker about doing something of the scale of Xsede if the resources that are available are diminishing in that way.
But if they begin a solicitation for these kind of things next year, what's roughly the time frame before they'd come online?
I believe they would be expected to be online in the first half of calendar 20.
Oh, that quick? Okay.
Yeah, these would be expected to come up quickly. In fact, if they release the solicitation early in the calendar year, say in the first quarter or even early in the second quarter, there could be an expectation for them to be in production by January or so of 20.
Wow. I'm surprised.
We sometimes have to move fast in this game. And I know you may not see a lot of that because that's not really what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to get your science done. But the infrastructure side, of course, is something that we within Xsede are looking at all the time.
Yeah. Time check.
Yeah. I've run over already, but if there's maybe any last questions before I let Emery kick me one more time under the table.
Yeah, okay, I know that was a big question, so I apologize for taking more time.
No, it's an important point, so I was happy to share on it, but Emery may want to.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is have a meeting dedicated to talking with John. Because there's a lot there. It was a good, important point, Diego. Yeah. And I'm sure there's likely more committee members that would like to comment. And we usually seem to run out of time. But unfortunately, we have to move on. If anybody has any further comments on these topics, please contact the UAC or contact Xsede directly, and let's get that feedback to them. So our next presentation is from Lizanne Di Stefano on the annual user survey. So Lizanne, can you take a moment?
John, are you going to stay on or are you getting off?
No, I'm going to stay.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut off the conversation with John, but actually maybe some of the things that you see in this survey, we can continue some of the discussion, because I think you'll see some similar themes here. So what I've been asked to do is present on our annual user survey. So this is the 2018 user survey that was completed last spring. The lead on this is Julie Wernert, who's a member of the evaluation team. She does a fantastic job with this. And then we're also assisted by Lorna Rivera. I will say that this year we did an in-depth presentation of the user survey at the site visit in June. And we had never done that before. We hit some highlights, but we never really talked to them about how Xsede gets information from users. And I think that they were very impressed that Xsede pays so much attention to what users say. So the user survey, we do it every year. The external evaluation team took over doing the user survey last year, and so we have done things a little bit differently. The first thing is that we get broad input from project stakeholders, and this group was one of the groups that we asked for input. You guys gave us some really nice suggestions about wording and added a few questions. We talked to each project area, leadership, project managers, our Xsede, the program officer, to make sure that we're asking the right questions. We want to keep a core set of items from year to year because we do like to look at trends, but we do add some new items because obviously things in Xsede change. The services that are available change. Some services are retired, some new services are added, so we do have several new items this year, and we also retired or refined some items. We also last year did a major overhaul of the key performance indicators and metrics for Xsede. So we aligned this user survey with those project metrics and reporting requirements so that it made a little bit more sense. The way that we do the sampling is that we pick a stratified random sample of 5,000 users derived from the total group who had had some interaction with Xsede resources in the previous 24 months. So that doesn't mean that they necessarily have a research allocation. They might have an education allocation or a training allocation. They may not have no allocation at all. They may just use training resources or other services of Xsede. And the way that we track them is that they have logged into the portal and done something with Xsede in the past 24 months. That gives us a little bit of a fresher idea of who the users of Xsede are. We also oversample to include some groups that we're particularly interested in, particularly those from traditionally underrepresented groups, which include disciplinary groups, because we want to have a large enough sample that we can make some statements about those. In 2018, we had a 22% response rate, so that's 1,100 cases out of 5,000. That was a little bit higher than the rate in 2017, where it was 20%. And it's hard to get that 22%, but we fought for that 22%. We have additional reminders. We have John do reminders. We had to extend the deployment period a little bit, but it's really important that we get enough responses that we really feel good about both the sample size, but also how well it represents the overall Xsede user population. And in this sample of 1,107, we're happy with the size, and also the representation is good, which you'll see in a minute. Generally, a 22% response rate is acceptable, particularly for online surveys with no incentives. And we're finding more and more that there's a survey fatigue. People get a lot of surveys. They tell us that in the text comments, and also when we do user focus groups, that they feel like they get a lot of surveys, not necessarily from Xsede, because we really do try to manage how much we contact users, but from all over. And so there is some survey fatigue. This is a general user survey, so these are not necessarily the most engaged users. They're just a random sample of users. So some users are more invested than others. We want to hear from all kinds of users, so that's why we choose the random sample. It's also, we've been doing this now for a long time, so as the project ages, sometimes people become less interested in responding. They've been asked many times before, and also national trends show that it's harder to get responses to online surveys. But we are actually, with all that being said, we're actually very pleased with this, and a very high response rate does not necessarily mean better or more valid data. So we feel that we can generalize from these findings with confidence. One thing that we're always very interested in is who is the Xsede user. And this respondent profile is very similar to that of previous years. About 31% are faculty, so about a third faculty, about 30% graduate students, 17% postdocs, and 11% university research staff. And this is held true for many, many years. So the typical population of Xsede users, I would say, closely parallels those data. About 6% of the people that responded indicated that they were a campus champion. So they have another role, like they might be university research staff, but they were in addition a campus champion. Another thing that's very important to remember about Xsede is we asked them how long they have been using Xsede resources. 32% had been using Xsede resources for less than 1 year, 26% 1 to 2, and 38% had been using Xsede resources for 3 or more years. So, and again, this is quite typical of previous years. And so what we always have to remember in Xsede is that, about a third of the users are new every year. And so efforts to publicize different services, to get people engaged, onboarding materials, they're very, very important, because a third of the group are new each year. That being said, 76% say that they're at least somewhat experienced Xsede users. They rate themselves at least 3 or higher. So about 75%, 3/4, feel like they know what they're doing at least somewhat with Xsede, and about 25% would say that they're novice users. So one of the dimensions that we look at is awareness, because as Deirdre said earlier, you know, maybe as a faculty member, I'm less aware because I'm not the one sitting there every day. So awareness is a really important thing to look at. Awareness increased from 2017 to 2018 for many services. The website, which is really important awareness because we want people to know where the website is, how to get to it, what they can do with it, went up from 4.49 to 4.54 on a 5-point scale. Virtually all of these are statistically significant because we have such a large sample, but anything over a 4.5 on a survey like that is pretty high. So the fact that the awareness was of the website is 4.5 is a really high number. Online technical documentation also increased. That's a good thing. Red is 2017, blue is 2018. And training opportunities went up a titch, not very much, but a little bit. This is always a hard thing to get out there, what training opportunities are available. The fact that it's above 3.5 is good, but there's always some frustration that it's not higher than that, given the amount of effort that they spend in sort of getting the word out about training opportunities. Several new services were added recently, so we had some new items, and these had lower awareness ratings because they're new items. So software integration support, resource integration support, software usage instrumentation support, software capabilities provided by Xsede, and John mentioned the single sign-on hub. That's new, but that is very popular. Lots of people know about it. And so it had a higher rating. So one of the things that we'll do then is track this over time to see, is awareness of these services increasing over time. So if you just compare the 2018 awareness ratings to the 2017 awareness ratings, you'll find that they decreased because we added this suite of new items. So the overall awareness actually went from 3.59 to 3.39. But if you do an apples-apples comparison, so the items that were on both the 2017 and the 2018, you find that overall awareness increased from 3.59 to 3.76. You know, obviously people say, oh, we'd love to get that number above 4, but remember, a third of the people are new to Xsede every year. So it's a constant refresh. And we're talking about a 5-point scale. So the metric for this is around a 3. The target for this is around a 3.5. We figure a 3.5 is a generally positive awareness rating. So anyone want to say anything about the awareness ratings before we move on to the next slide? Any questions, comments?
Sure, one thing. The ones that have historical numbers and that are going up slightly, Xsede website, online technical documentation, training opportunities. With those phrases, I think any new person would know exactly what you're talking about. You move down into the next category and you say software integration support, resource integration support. I think a lot of people say, I have no idea what they mean by that. I wonder what they're talking about. Could be any one of a number of things that come to mind. And so partly it could just be the phrasing, and since they are just awareness, somebody's likely, or I would be likely to say to myself, well, I don't know what's meant by that, so I'm not aware of it. No.
That could be true, but you know, also if you aren't sure what is meant by that, it may also be that you're not aware of what is meant by that. So there's probably a positive correlation between not being exactly sure what the terminology is and your overall awareness of what's offered by Xsede in that area. We do provide links in the survey if people want to go on and read more about things. So, and maybe about a third of the people do follow the link. So we do try to provide, you know, backup information if people want to know about it. But in the focus groups and in other data that we collect, we think these are pretty accurate assessments of how aware people are of these services. Other questions or comments? Okay, so then we break it out lots of different ways. I'm not going to go into all the disaggregation in this meeting, but I just want to show you some of the things we look at. So we want to look at awareness by user type. So who were the more aware? So there you see different titles and then how far above the mean they were. So the most aware group is center non-research staff. So these are people in computer centers who are not research staff, but maybe are responsible for bringing users to Xsede or promoting use of Xsede within their own center. They're the most. The research staff are the next. This makes sense. We also have a very interested group of high school users. It's a small but mighty group of high school users, and those are largely using the training resources so that their high school courses actually rely a lot on Xsede training resources to give students higher level computer skills than they might normally receive in their high school. The less aware group are the undergraduate students, graduate students, and what we find is that graduate students are kind of just-in-time users. They use the narrow group of resources that they need to be able to get their work done, and they are largely unaware of other things that aren't relevant to them. So if you look at the pattern of rating of graduate students, they know a lot about a small number of things, don't know much about other things. And then there's a very, very diverse group of other users who are less aware than the general population. So this is just an example of the kind of crosstabs that we do to try to figure out what the user groups look like. By institution type, so HPC centers know a lot about what is available through Xsede. Two things that I think Xsede is very proud of is that minority serving institutions also score above average on awareness. And as you know, there's a group in Xsede called Community Engagement, and they are responsible for outreach to minority serving institutions. So it's quite remarkable, I think, that MSIs report higher levels of awareness than other institutions. The same with EPSCoR state institutions. The CEE does special attention to EPSCoR states, and they also score above the mean. Below the mean, corporate and industry. Xsede doesn't have a particular initiative around corporate and industry, and they are less aware of services, not-for-profits, and baccalaureate colleges, or primarily undergraduate institutions, are also slightly less aware. So now we're going to move from awareness to satisfaction, which is the other dimension that we assess. Any remarks or questions about awareness before we move on to satisfaction? Okay, so looking at satisfaction, satisfaction with Xsede is quite high. All areas, again, scored significantly above 3.0. Most areas report higher levels of satisfaction. The highest levels of satisfaction are capability of batch computational resources, capability and scalability of Xsede computational resources for simulation, supporting consult services response time, effectiveness and availability, the Xsede user portal, and the Xsede website. So again, getting a score of over 4 on a survey like this is doing very well. I do other sorts of evaluations like this. I would say their scores of about 3.86, 3.93 are considered very high. So Xsede is quite remarkable in terms of these levels of user satisfaction. Any comments or thoughts about that? And then overall satisfaction. So this is not an aggregate of all of the individual satisfaction. This is a global item that says overall, how satisfied are you with Xsede? It is also quite high, 4.28 on a 5-point scale. It was exactly the same in 2017. And again, maintaining this level of overall satisfaction at this point in the life of the project is notable and significant. And in general, in a project that's 5 years or 10 years, you see satisfaction increase at a certain point, and then you kind of see a tipping point, and then maybe some of the services go out and aren't replaced, or some of the resources change, and you might see a decline in satisfaction. We have not hit that point yet in Xsede. Satisfaction continues to climb. Satisfaction, high school users, again, small but mighty group, very, very happy with the training resources that are available to them. Government lab users also are slightly more satisfied than average, and faculty are slightly more satisfied than average. Again, in other groups that I evaluate, kind of rare to see faculty above the mean. So that is a good sign. Less satisfied, corporate industrial. We said Xsede does not really see them as a target audience. Undergraduates, again, aren't really seen as a target audience for Xsede, although I will say that as we see computation moving lower and lower into education, so now many undergraduates are involved in high performance computing and research computing, even moving down into the high school, may be important to turn to undergraduates as an audience. Questions or comments? More satisfied minority serving institutions and teaching focused institutions. So teaching focused institutions are kind of non-R1 institutions regardless of size. Both of those are slightly above the mean, less satisfied corporate and not-for-profits. One of the questions that we ask every year is how important is Xsede associated or operated resources in conducting your work? Again, a 5-point scale from not at all important to essential. 60% this year reported that the use of Xsede associated or operated resources is essential in conducting their research program. So that's the number of fives, the percentage of fives. And if you combine that with the fours, which is very important, it's 87% of the group say that Xsede is important in conducting their research. We also ask if Xsede did not exist, how would your work be affected? And here's the range of responses that we get. So 944 people responded to this question. They gave 2,647 responses, and then we did a qualitative analysis and sorted them into these categories. So the largest category is that the time required to finish the projects would increase, followed by the size and scope of projects would be substantially reduced. The quality of results would suffer. They would abandon some or all projects. So those are the largest categories, over 10%. Lower than that, they would complete projects with other similar HP resources, but you see only 9% of the group indicated that. Their ability to collaborate with other researchers would be limited. They would complete projects with conventional resources, so that would be 5%. Their employment prospects would be limited, and then 3% said they don't know. So these are what users say would happen if Xsede were to go away. Any comments or thoughts about this presentation? All right, so Diego, I think you'll be comforted here because the suggested improvements are the same that we hear every year, and they are exactly what you said in the beginning, more and faster. They want more in computational resources, more software and data storage capabilities. They want more training opportunities, especially for new users. And this is actually the first time that we've heard the emphasis on new users. There was a lot of debate in Xsede about where the training should hit, what type of user, and there was generally an idea that there were lots of resources out there for new people who are new to HPC, and so maybe training should hit the intermediate and experienced users. But this year we had a lot of comments that there should be training and onboarding opportunities for new users, and then the request for a more flexible allocations process.
So a quick question about that. I don't recall, were these, or were people asked to prioritize this?
No, this was open-ended, so we get thousands of open-ended comments, and then we categorize them.
Okay, thanks.
So these are the top 4.
Yeah, okay.
So we have 3 open-ended questions: the unique value of Xsede, beyond just resources, how Xsede could be more useful, and general comments about Xsede and NSF investment in Xsede. Most of the comments are positive, and they're actually good. People take a lot of time to do them. We read every single comment. We then categorize them into 7 categories: allocation, training and education, program capabilities, facilities and resources, improved functionality, access to resources, expanded new resources, and contributions to science. So we go through and allocate them. In the report, every single comment is available, except some of the crazy ones, or ones that you know, are disturbing in nature, vulgar or disturbing in nature, but that's a very, very low percentage. Basically, we release every single comment, and Xsede people read them in the areas that are relevant to their work. So here's just some examples, and again, we'll make this available to you, so I don't want to read through all of them, but you can see the nature of the responses. So the first one: I think the growing number of Xsede related webinars is doing a great job. More of these webinars and their documentation will help researchers around the country. As a federal scientist, I encourage Xsede to continue to make resources available to those U.S. researchers who are not supported by NSF grants. Federal scientists are not eligible to compete for NSF grants, and the Xsede computing resources are a critical mechanism for those accessing and using supercomputing facilities. So when you saw the government lab ratings, this is probably from a worker in a government lab who really appreciates being able to use Xsede resources, even though they are not, you know, directly funded by NSF. I'm so very grateful to those who make these resources available, especially important to a little fish like myself. Thanks for all you do. So you can see that in a lot of them, there's just a very nice vibe. They appreciate the fact that it's available. The 5th one down there: Xsede is a single factor that enabled our metagenome analysis that would otherwise be impossible for us to perform. I heard about it from a grad student from my lab who had been using it. I also really appreciated that we had a campus champion to provide support and guidance. So every year, I think I'm impressed by the time that people take. It's kind of a long survey to begin with. These questions are at the end of the survey, but they still take time to fill them out. And like the last comment there, help desks are extremely helpful. When I want to install programs or when I have questions on usage of resources, their responses are always fast and helpful. Help desk is a very, very hard job. And so getting responses like that, I think, are very encouraging to the help desk people, but also to let management know that, that, you know, users are feeling this way. But not everything is happy. So here's some critique. For us to use Xsede resources for anything other than a prototyping environment, we require longer term allocations agreements than a single year. I want to see mailing lists like Campus Champions open to all. Instructions for archiving data, for example, to the ranch resource should be clearer and correct. This could also be much easier to use. It would also be nice if more information was provided about queue time and the reasons why it's increasing. Make sure that you instrument your service on key metrics like time to echo characters and time to run jobs. Increase genomic support. So you can see that some of them are very specific and actionable. So it provides good guidance for people running various services in terms of how to improve them. That last comment, better help documentation for someone who has never used a supercomputer before, is an example of the kind of new user comments that we get. And then finally, we ask for suggested improvements and enhancements. A very common one is multi-year allocations, and I think that they have begun to address that. The third one, is it possible to provide mentorship or collaboration for people like me who has very limited background of bioinformatics sequence analysis, more beginning oriented help content, more demo accounts, easier to integrate local resources, specifics about hosting a Jupyter notebook server, a backfill queue similar to Blue Waters, metadata, automated performance reporting, and runtime predictions would be great. So this just gives you an idea of the types of suggestions that, that people are making. So that's the end of my formal presentation. Do people have comments or concerns? John, do you want to say anything about the user survey?
Well, I find the user survey a very important tool that we use every year, and though you may not see it, it's this and other things that we do feed directly into our planning processes. So, and these often drive change in the project. So I'm very glad that it you know, I would say it's quite evident from those that respond, they take this seriously, as we do, and we get some extremely helpful input. I find the free-form text responses to be extremely informative, to sort of complement the numerical responses, because you get a sense of where people are coming from and what their experience is a little bit better than just giving in, you know, a select from a list sort of response. Part of what I'm saying is, if you're asked to respond to it, please do, because it's really helpful. I think what we're getting from this has been quite good, and particularly now that we're getting to have a long enough a baseline in time where we can really see trends, and those are very interesting. And Lizanne talked about some of those. There's many more things, because there's no way to cram the whole thing into just a brief presentation. But so we value this highly, and so if you are hearing anything from Lizanne that doesn't resonate with your own thinking, we'd like to hear, because we want to make sure there's not some inconsistency we're missing too.
Yeah, that's a great point, John.
So I had a question. I know you showed several areas where things scored very well. I'm wondering if there were also areas that didn't score so well.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because I had the same feeling when I was reviewing this presentation. I think I was in like a happy mood when I did this. So I looked up the data. So this is the one you're referring to, where the highest levels of satisfaction are. So the three lowest items for satisfaction, the lowest one, which was a 3.75, is visualization facilities and rendering capabilities. The next lowest one, which is a 3.82, capacity of data storage resources, e.g. Wrangler data storage. Oh no, I'm sorry, I lied. It's a capacity of data analytic resources, e.g. Wrangler Data Analytics Cluster. And the next lowest one, which is a 3.86, is functionality of toolkits for campus cyber infrastructure, XCBC, XNIT. So those are the three lowest, and everything else is near or above 4.0, which I would not consider low. 4 to me is a very, very strong rating on this scale. So those are the ones that fall below 4.
I think, yeah, so 3.7 in my book is a great review too. I mean, in a broad audience. So, yeah. So, I mean, if you're using this to market publicly, you might make a statement like that. Lowest score was this, because once I hear that, it's like, then I stop thinking about that anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like everything scored good.
Right.
You know, everything was above 3.7. It's like, I think that's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, it really is. And again, you know, in other surveys that I do like this, it is actually rare to have a lot of items above a 4. Most are in the 3.3 to 3.8 range. So these are very, very high.
Impressive.
Yeah, Xsede Project has a lot to be proud of with these kinds of scores and with that kind of an NSF review that we saw earlier.
Other thoughts, questions, comments?
No, this is Diego again. So I have a question. Would it make sense? I mean, I'm thinking again of, you know, people that want more faster and people that want you know, more training and so on. They may be different constituents. And is there any way to separate not just experience, but perhaps allocation size?
Yeah, definitely.
For example, people that use very large allocations may have different views about many topics than people that use small allocations.
Exactly, and that's an example of the kind of disaggregation that we do. So we do it by type of allocation size, you know, type of institution. We do lots of slicing and dicing to really try to really understand what the user groups are like.
And is that data available, or you?
We do have that data available. I didn't incorporate it into our presentation today, but it is in our overall report.
So yeah, no, I mean, does it show a different picture?
Yes, I think that there definitely you see that. I would say that one of the areas that shows a different picture is by disciplines. I think different disciplines have different needs and use different resources. So that's a very useful analysis to do. I think the other difference is by institution type, because I think that, you know, research institutions have definitely different profiles than primarily teaching institutions.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, looking at the slide that you have now, for example, capability of batch computational resources may be more important, right, in terms of, you know, how satisfied they are than the website or the portal for somebody that uses millions of CPU hours compared to somebody new. But I mean, with the previous comment that 3.7 is the minimum, I think, I mean, the satisfaction overall is great, I think.
Yeah.
But in terms of prioritizing and see what people care more about, than a weighted average or simply separating between sizes, not just institution, but how much of the resources they are using may be helpful also. Not just a comment.
Yep. No, I think that's good. And, you know, the other thing is this is kind of used as a management tool within Xsede. So it's also important depending on where you are in the Xsede organization. So the people that manage communications and external relations and community outreach are, you know, very interested in the user portal, the website, the training materials. People who manage the allocation system are very interested in the allocation items. So, you know, we also slice and dice it by area within Xsede to give people information about the services that they have control over.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anything else?
I just wanted to follow up again on like for the person in charge of the area or someone's in charge of the area of 3.7, like still a fine appropriate approval, but let's say is there a process where you say this person owns the job of getting it over 4, so we're all of us are over, all the services are over 4? I mean, is there a follow-up to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do present this at the quarterly meeting, and then we do follow up with each of the L2 and L3 areas to discuss those items that are most fall within their purview. That's where we do a lot of the disaggregation also. And then sometimes it's decided that they're gonna try to increase a rating and get it up high. And then for the visualization one, I mean, John, you were there. I think the reaction was, yeah, that's a pretty fair rating. You know, we haven't put a lot of emphasis in visualization facilities and rendering capabilities.
That's absolutely right, but
Yeah.
it's also that's a little more complicated problem because NSF isn't funding any of those things for us to actually have available in the community.
Okay.
So we can develop the support, but with nothing to work with, we're kind of stuck. And this is the sort of stuff we bring back to NSF to help them understand what's going on in the community. When we hear this sort of thing coming from the community, they want to know that, and we're often the organization that has enough reach into the community and see a large enough cross section to catch these things. So we pass it on to them. They have to decide what they're going to do with it at that point. I can say that I have seen, although they will never confirm any causality, I have seen correlation between providing input to them and things that appear in subsequent solicitations that are consistent with what we provided them. So I believe they're listening and taking action on the things that we feed to them, but that process takes a while to happen, right? So if they get that input and it goes into even, say, as I discussed earlier, the potential solicitation that would come up next year, that means we're not talking about a resource that would be usable, you know, for 18 months from now.
Right.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, like for many years when we would do the awareness ratings, ECSS, which is sort of, you know, considered to be the crown jewel of Xsede, actually had very low awareness ratings, and that kind of drove everyone crazy. So there was a lot of effort to try to get that rating up and try to figure out ways to let people know about ECSS. So, you know, I think that there's a careful attention to what things can we really have direct control over, what things do we have the resources to deal with, and you know, I think it's really considered at that level.
That makes sense. I mean, it's perfectly within your purview and, in fact, your obligation to make decisions about, okay, 3.7 is enough for that. You know, the investment that we're required to get it to 4 isn't justified.
Or we don't have the resources to do it, you know, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think it's that level of careful discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Emery, I think I'm done.
Okay, any final comments or questions for Lizanne from any of the committee members?
Thank you.
I had one quick question, Lizanne.
Yeah.
So you had there was one of the slides had something about a desire for new training. And I was wondering if you noticed any correlation with that and sort of the new resources like the cloud resources or having to use the you know, GPUs or mix and these sorts of things.
Right, definitely. And that, you know, that's something we ask in an open-ended question. So we do see a relationship like that. And then also in our evaluation of training events, we also ask people to suggest new training topics. And we do see those trends in that data source as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lizanne.
Yep, you're very welcome.
Informative. Any final comments or questions or suggestions for further topics from the committee?
So Emery, I did want to follow up on a comment made earlier. You had suggested maybe a discussion with me at some point, and I'd be happy to do that with this group to focus a little bit more on those kinds of issues, particularly if there was a set of things that folks wanted to try and identify in advance so I could be prepared for that. But I'm also willing to play stump the PI if that's what people want to do.
Well, you always have so many informative topics and things you can go off on that I'm sure we could easily keep an hour and a half just stumping the PI. Okay. So for a future meeting, maybe we'll plan to do that at one of our 3 or 4 meetings a year, and just sort of have an open session with you, John. I appreciate that offer.
So I'm open to that if the folks want to do it.
Okay. Okay then. Barring any further comments, okay, I'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Emery.
Thanks, Emery.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.